Hi, my name is Simon Bennett. I'm the ZAP founder and one of the project leads. And this is a series of sessions, training sessions I'm giving to the folks here at StackOrg. And actually, one important thing, as you'll see, I've just got the ZapCon swag, including ZapBot, and I will tweet a lot about that, and already have. But that's aside. Hopefully you are starting to get your ZapCon swag as well. But onto the training session, and last week I did introduction to Zest. So it was Zest part 1, because I didn't finish going through. But basically I gave an overview of Zest and showed you how you could create Zest scripts via the Zap desktop, either doing them manually or recording requests or adding requests to existing Zest scripts. I showed some loops and then kind of extracting values from responses and using them in future responses. But I think I only showed you Zest standalone scripts, so I now want to show you a bit more than that, so some different types. And hopefully you can now see Zap. So what I want to do now is just get something to work with. So I'm going to start by just doing a little manual explore, and usually I use Firefox, but this time I'm going to use Chrome because there's a slight problem with launching Firefox on via Zap on macOS at the moment. It's not actually a bug in Zap, it's a bug in one of the other tools we use, so we're trying to get that fixed as soon as possible. So this time I'm going to use Chrome, and I'm just going to go to budget, and I am going to just submit a comment. So nice and straightforward. So one thing you'll see, so I'm going to go here and have a look at the requests, and you'll see that the browser made a post request. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and because we have this option to invoke any particular request with a script, and you see I've got a whole load of scripts here, and one of them is resend as a get request. So I'll send that, and we'll see if we look at the request, the original post had nothing on the URL and had post data, and we now have a look at the get request. We'll see there's nothing, there's no post data, and we just have everything on the get. So that's nice and simple. But the reason I wanted to show you that, so that's one of the standard scripts we include. I think that might be part of the community scripts. But the reason I wanted to show it to you is because that one is written in Zest. So that is, as I said, it's a targeted script, so we can have targeted scripts written in any language you like or any ones we support. But what I'll do is just have a look at the Zest one, because you've probably seen when I was showing you Zest scripts before, I kind of opened each node. So as you'll kind of know, if you saw the last episode, you'll know that Zest scripts they do appear in the script console, but it looks pretty horrible because that's a raw JSON and you can't edit those. So Zest scripts, you actually look at them in the scripts tab here, and they're kind of hierarchical. So what I'm going to do is actually try and see if we can understand this script without opening any of the dialogues. So the first thing is a comment. This script resends the select request as a get request, removing the request body to the URL for posts. As you see, if you hover over that, you can see the full comment. Then we've got a print statement that's called with request.url. And you'll see that is where it appeared down here when it printed out. Then we've got this conditional. So in Zest, conditionals are kind of if then else, and they're all those three statements all appear at the same level. And so if request.method equals post, then, and you see this is why it's kind of hierarchical, because then we've got a comment here. It's a post, move the body to the URL and change the method. So we then do another if statement here, another conditional. If regex.url, then we've got a regex on a question mark with a backslash in front. So basically saying if the request URL contains a question mark. So then we've got a comment which says URL already includes parameters. So what we then want to do is assign request.url equals request.url with the curly brackets around, so we know it's not text, it's actually a Zest variable. Then an ampersand, and then the request body. Else URL doesn't include parameters, in which case we're doing the same thing, but we've got a question mark there instead of an ampersand. And finally, we assign, well, in this part, we assign the request body to nothing. So we clear the request body. Then we make sure that we change the request method to a get, and then we make a request here. And this is the only one which we actually have to kind of look at if we want to see the full details. So we can see that's the URL, there's the method, and we're actually putting the request headers and the request body in. Now, strictly speaking, we could have taken that request body here and not bothered setting it to null or to empty. But you kind of get the idea. So basically, what this is showing is that, or I'm trying to show, is that you can generally understand Zest scripts without opening every dialog. Just looking through them, you should be able to get an understanding of what's going on. And you can actually have Zest scripts as targeted scripts, so they don't just have to be standalone. So just to try and prove that, so that's something that was written earlier. But what I thought I'd do is kind of write a new script. So we've got resend as get request. So I thought, well, why don't we create a new script to resend as post request? So I will create a new script, and that is going to be a targeted script. And we're going to be using Zest, and we just want the default template. And that's the usual dialog that comes up. So basically what we get is this all that happens is we have one comment. So targeted scripts are invoked manually for URLs, typically via right-click menus. Template script just repeats the request and prints out the URL that's been called for. So there's the request and there's the print. So I'll actually move the print up. So remember, you can just drag and drop statements in Zest. So what we're going to do is I'm first going to check the method, which I don't need to do, but I want to show conditions again. So add a Zest condition, and you want to go for equals. So we have to test an existing variable. So request method, and if it is a get, and you can see we can do case exact and we can do inverse here, so we can put not in front, but obviously I don't want to do this time. Well, I could do, if it's not post, I could have done that. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this is, so here is we've now created this conditional statement. And what we can do is these conditionals can actually be much more complicated. So I'm just going to show you how. What we can do is we can right click there and then surround, and we can surround with ors or ands. So I'm going to surround with an or, and then we can add more conditions to the or. And you see I could actually surround it with other or and as you see, when I add Zest expression, we've got various options like the regex equals, status code, response time, and we can add ands and ors, so we can have kind of any depth of structure we want. In this case, I'm just going to go for an equals, so request method equals put, and save that. So that is a way of having a kind of structured conditional statement. And I said you can go as deep as you need to for these things. So we now know we've got a get or request, and so we then want to put stuff into the then branch. So I'm going to do an assignment, and what I actually want to do is I want to grab the request URL and save that for a bit. So variable name, now we can reuse something, but I want a new one here. So this is URL params, and I want that equal to the request URL. So right click here and put in the request URL and save that. So we've now got a copy of the URL params, but we don't want the whole URL params. So what I want to do is I can now replace. So I actually want to replace in variable. So this time, so we want the request, so I want URL params, and what I want to do is I want everything up to the question mark, and I want to replace that with nothing. So I basically want to get rid of the everything before the URL parameters. So we then just have the URL parameters. So that means we should just have the URL parameters. Then I'm going to add another assignment, and this time I want to, well, I actually want to replace again. So this time the request URL, and in this case I want to replace everything after. So all of the URL parameters, and I want to replace them with nothing. So I'll save that. Then what I want to do is do an assignment variable to a string. So this time I want to do the request body, and I want that to equal the URL parameters. And finally, I want to do another assignment. So variable to string, in this case, I want to do the request method, and I want to make that into a post. So if the request method is a get or a put, then make a copy of all of the URL, replace everything before the question mark with nothing, so we've just got the URL parameters. In the URL, replace everything, the question mark and everything after with nothing, so we take them out of the request URL, put the URL parameters into the request body, and then change request method to a post. Now I suppose I could have actually assigned the request URL to the request body and put done in there without having a separate parameter, but hey, that's what I've done. So hopefully now, if we have a look, so here we actually have, that's the request I made. So hopefully now, if I invoke it with script resend as post, then we will see down here that we actually have, and I've got that wrong. So it's a shame. I forgot to set the regex option, which is why it didn't work. So normally I would just be able to change this. Unfortunately, we found a bug in Zest, which means these scripts are cached and can't be changed. So I will have to restart Zap, but I will change these. And I think we actually got a fix for the bug. Is there's a PR outstanding right now. So what I'll do, I will just save this. So normally that would then work, but in this particular case, until that bug is fixed, I will have to just restart Zap, and then it should pick up the changes. So yeah, as trying out testing for this session, I found out that the Zest scripts were being cached, which is the idea, but if you made any changes, then those changes weren't applied. So I think Ricardo's actually got a pull request outstanding now to fix that, but I haven't had a chance to check it, and it's not been merged, of course. So hopefully, when I go back, we will have so the targeted scripts, we've still got the resend as post request, and I will now go back to a manual explore again, go to budget, and this time what I'll do is I'll do a search this time, and hopefully now, so this is a get request. Now if I right click and in resend as post, now we will see we actually have the post request without any URL parameters, and the URL parameters are now in the post request. And hopefully, yep, so Zap and Zest automatically update the content length. So that shows you it's relatively straightforward to create targeted scripts, particularly if you can actually edit them, or if you get them right the first time. So the other thing I want to show you now is different types of scripts. Okay, so as you'll see, we've got lots of different types of scripts which I've covered in Zap scripts, which I've covered in sessions before. Now, you cannot actually create Zest scripts of all of these types. It doesn't really make sense, particularly things like encode, decode, input vectors. These are quite technical scripts, and Zest isn't really a good language for doing very technical things, fine-grained manipulation. It's much better for kind of manipulating requests and responses. But one thing you can do is you can create Zest scripts for passive scan rules. So why would you do that? So we have a whole load of passive scan rules written in particular languages, but you'll see some of these are quite complicated, and sometimes you want to do things which are very simple. And one example is we have a look at budget, and we go here and we add something to the basket. Then if I actually resend that, and if I put in a quantity which isn't a number, then you'll see we get an internal server error. I'm just going to make a copy of that. Now, in this particular case, if we go to alerts, we will see we actually have an application error disclosure. But that is looking for particular things, so you might actually have a custom error page that this particular rule doesn't find. So I'm going to pretend we've got that case here. So what I'll do is create a passive scan rule in Zest. So right-click, new script, and Zest pscan, and use Zest. And in this particular case, I just want the default template. Save that. So what we'll see is we have a comment here. So passive scripts are called for every pair of requests and responses. Template script just prints out the URL it's been called for. Passive scripts cannot make new requests but can raise alerts via the fail action. What we want to do is basically we want to have a look at the request body. So what I'll do is I want a condition, a regex one, and in this case, so I want to look in the response body, and in this case, I'm just gonna look for HTTP status to start with. Status, if I spell that correctly. And then what I'm gonna do is surround that with an AND expression. So what we want is another Zest expression and regex. So response body includes internal server error. Just to show you that, just show these different, just the different conditions again. So if both of those conditions are true, then we want to add a Zest action, which is fail. And this is custom error page found, and we'll have it as a high priority. Now, in this case, for active and passive scan rules, you actually have to enable them. So enable script, and then if I go back to the history and resend, still the invalid one, resend, and we've got the internal server error. And hopefully now we have a custom error found alert. Now in this particular case, you'll see we don't have a huge amount of information. We've got the URL, we've got the risk, which are set, and that's pretty much it. So you can't put a lot of information in here. So if you want to include a lot more information, you probably need to use a different scripting type. But as you see, it's very quick and easy to do these kind of things. I didn't have to worry about any syntax. Whereas if you have a look at some of these other ones, you have to know a lot more about how to do these things. Whereas Zest is very much more of a kind of point and click type of language. So it's kind of like a macro language. You can't really have syntax errors because the GUI kind of constrains you, just shows you what you need to do. So what I'll do is not only can we have passive scan rules, we can also have active scan rules as well written in Zest. So I'll just disable that one. So with active scan rules, I will create a new script again. So Zest scan, and using the default template. And again, so in this case, what we have is there is a target parameter which you can replace with your chosen attack. Now, I'm not actually going to do that. So, because what I'm going to do is I am going to just automatically append a particular debug parameter. So what I want to do is, say we've got an application where there is a debug parameter which is disabled, which should normally be disabled, but we want to kind of check for it. So what we can do is, if we add, and so I actually want to do a condition again, a regex one. So the regex, so I want to look for the question mark. So if there is a regex, so sorry, if you've got a question mark, then we already have some parameters on the URL. So I want to do an assignment, assign variable to string, and then what we want to do is we want to assign the request URL. We know that there are already parameters there, so we can just do ampersand debug equals true. And actually want to, so I want to do pretty much the same thing, so I can copy and paste that there, but in this case we know there aren't any parameters, so actually, and just as well I did that because I still want to include the request URL. So save that and put the request URL in there as well. So then what we want to do, so we want to then make the request. So, and put a condition here. And this time I'm going to create an empty and. So to add as this expression, and again we go for regex. So this is in the response body, and we will go, and I know I could do a kind of more complex thing, but or more complex regex, but I'm just going to put them as two separate ones. So if we have a select and a from in the response body, then that is when we want to fail. And then we can fail again with high priority. We're basically checking the URL, see if it's got a question mark. If it has, then we're appending debug equals true to the URL. Otherwise, we are just appending question mark debug equals true. We're making the request. Then we're checking that both the response body has select and from, and if so, then we fail. Now, in this particular case, I'll go and do that search again, and hopefully, if I haven't made any mistakes, go down and I will attack active scan, and I think I have a script only policy. Let's see if that works. And did I get, have I changed that correctly? I know what I've done, I didn't enable it. So let's enable the script and just double check that the script only policy does what I expect it to do. Yep, it's got script active scan rules enabled. So if I go back to the history and on the search active scan script only, and this time it did actually do something, and we now have debug still enabled. And if you're actually interested, I'll go back to Chrome and we actually go, then we'll see that it does actually print out the SQL statement. So what this is showing is that if you have particular things that you want to test for, whether active or passive scan rules, then Zest scripts are quite a good option for just doing these very quick checks. And you know, these do get compiled, and so they're actually very quick, and they get cached as well. And very soon they will allow them to be changed when they're cached. So that's then so basically I've shown you the targeted scripts, well, standalone ones for the last time, targeted scripts, active scan rule and a passive scan rule. Now, one thing I want to do just before we finish is show you about environmental variables. because one thing we can do in ZAP is we support environmental variables in scripts. So if I actually go to find the right browser, if you have a look at the documentation for scripts, you'll see, so it talks about different script types, and then it talks about global variables and script variables. Now in Zest we don't support script variables, we do support global variables. And this means we can actually exchange data between Zest scripts and non-Zest scripts. So if I just go to, I'll just show you that in a kind of standalone mode again. So I'll go and I'll create a new standalone script, and I'll do a GraalJS script, and she won't use any templates at all. So what we'll see is, we go here, we can see, and there are ways of shortening this, but basically we can get and set global variables, get it right. So we can just get a global variable like that. So if I just go print, and what I want to do is just call that test_env. I'll clear the screen down there, and if I run that, we'll see we just get null because test_env hasn't been defined. So what I'll now do is I will create a new script, and this time I'll call it Zest, and I'll just do a standalone Zest script. And in this particular case, what I want to do is I want to create a new action where we set a global variable. And surprisingly enough, I'm going to call this test_env, and see if I can even spell maybe. So if I run that now, then apparently nothing will happen. So if I go back to here, and if I now clear that and run, we'll see it is set from Zest. It's all very good. So what I'll also do now is just show you the reverse. So what we can do is we can set global variables in this way in normal scripts. So test_env and set from JS, run that, and nothing will happen at all because I've not printed anything out. And here now what I'll do is I will delete that because that will just confuse things. And instead what I want to do is I want to assign a variable to a global variable. So equals test_env, and then I just want to add a print, and now I want to print the global variable, and if I run that, then you'll see it's set from JavaScript. So that was just a very quick introduction to, or explaining how you can kind of change. I mean, you might have noticed there in the actions, we've also got an option to remove global variables as well. But basically, this is a good way if you need to exchange information between scripts of different types. And that is all I was planning on going through. I have not finished going through Zest yet. There's quite a lot more to go through, particularly on the client side. Next time I'll go through Zest Part 3, which will probably cover client-side scripts and maybe a few other things as well. But if you're watching this after the event on YouTube and you've got any questions, just ask them in the comment section below. Thank you very much.